They say.
They all believe that he is DB Cooper.
Oh, really?
Absolutely.
Really?
Yeah. And, the stepdaughter, I asked her, and she was pretty young at the time. She had 3 older sisters that all lived there with her at the time, and she knew him around, she was living there with him around the time of the skyjacking, and Ted Braden was a long-haul truck driver. And she told me, well, we lived in a penthouse in Chicago, and Ted and my mother both drove newer model Mercedes-Benz. She said, I never understood how he had that kind of money on a long-haul truck driver salary. And she said she would get calls from the FBI through the years, or the family would, about him possibly being DB Cooper. Ted Braden got some other federal trouble. He would arrange for his trailers that he was driving from state to state. He was arranging for them to be stolen, and they set it up to where the trailer would be here. These guys would steal it, but he was it was an inside job. He was in on it. He got caught for that one time, and a few other kind of hijinks similar to that. He stole a bunch of meat one time and fish, like high dollar value stuff. So he was a criminal. But he was a smart criminal. He had a very high IQ. He had in the military, he had a GT score of 150. And if you kind of extrapolate IQ out from that, it's extremely high. I mean, that's Hank that was overseeing him at Fort Dix said that was the second highest GT score he'd ever seen. So Braden was highly intelligent, certainly somebody that could have come up with a DB Cooper heist. And as I said, he was in Vietnam. He was in Special Forces. A lot of people talk about their Cooper suspect and try to act like they were in Special Forces. Or the only other one that was actually ever even a Green Beret was Richard McCoy, that we talked about a little bit. And that was a really brief stint for about 4 months in 1965. But Ted Braden was in Special Forces. He was in a group called MACV-SOG, and that stands for Materials Assistance Command Vietnam Studies and Observations Group, which was, SOG for short. And that's a really benign name for the Black Ops. These guys were dropped into Laos. They would go try to snatch prisoners. They would do wiretaps deep into Laos along the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Of course, they weren't supposed to be in Laos because of the Geneva Accords. And if you got caught over there, you're pretty much dead. No one was coming for you. If you got into a lot of trouble, sometimes you would get bombed by your own forces just so you wouldn't talk. I mean, just so they knew they would torture you for what you knew, so they would just bomb your position if they knew it was what they called a positive capture. So that group had 100% casualty rate in Vietnam. But their average kill ratio to their one man was like 1 to 15 or something extremely high. These guys were just really fierce. And among these elite guys in this unit, Ted Braden was seen as the best. He was seen as the most gutsy, craziest, daredevil, no fear of death guy in that entire unit. And these guys are the toughest. I mean, and when the whole DB Cooper heist happened, they all pointed to Ted Braden. They said not only could he do that, jump blindfolded, but he's the guy that would have had the ingenuity to come up with that, to jump out of a plane in a jumbo jet. No one's ever done that before. No one's ever hijacked a jet and jumped out with a parachute with $200,000 and $20 bills strapped to their body with a briefcase bomb. Of course, that was a game changer. To even come up with that scheme shows the intellect there. And among these elite guys in Special Forces, one of them is a guy named Billy Wall, and this guy's got more accolades for bravery and stuff over there that you couldn't believe. And another guy's his name is John Plaster. And really, I mean, these guys are legends in Special Forces, and they both said, DB Cooper, Ted Braden. I mean, there's never a number 2 with these guys. They always say Ted Braden. They never say Ted Braden and maybe this guy, or Ted Braden and maybe Bill Smith. It's never that. It's always Ted Braden. And, I thought, man, how could these guys be wrong? Because when they heard about the Cooper jump, they said this has Special Forces op all over it. The way he carried it out, the way he asked for the notes back, he was calm. DB Cooper was calm. He never got nervous. He only got excited when they brought the money to him, and they said he was kind of childish when he saw all the cash was brought on the plane. But he was never got nervous about making the jump or being caught. And that's a special person. That's training like you wouldn't believe. I mean, I mentioned Richard McCoy did a similar jump, got away with it. He got away with it, but he made so many errors doing it, and he was a nervous wreck, putting on makeup. He called attention to himself, and he was a really outstanding helicopter pilot in Vietnam. He had 2 Silver Stars. I mean, very brave guy. But he doing this kind of caper was extremely nervous, like anybody would be. But D.B. Cooper was so calm. And that just matched up with Ted Braden perfectly. From anyone I talked to that knew him, I talked to his jumping partner, a guy named Al Tyre. And Al knew Ted Braden from a parachute jumping team in the Army called the Golden Arrows. And they met in the early 1960s. And they would go to these parachute competitions all through Europe. And Ted would win a lot of them. Sometimes Al would win. But these were the best of the best because they were, they would compete for, skydiving. I mean, these guys that were so good at it, they just excelled. And Al actually, told the whole story about knowing Braden in the early 60s and told me about Ted Braden having a friend named John Singlob, who was which eventually became a general, and he was also one of the co-founders of the CIA. He was a World War II. He fought in World War II. So did Ted Braden, by the way. Ted Braden started out his military career by lying about his age and joined up to fight during World War II, and he caught probably the last year of the war, and he wound up in the Battle of the Bulge and saw a lot of combat at a young age. And I think it was 16 after lying about his age, and he survived, came home, and then kind of did a few odd jobs and wound up being a career military guy on and off. He tried to go into the Air Force. Didn't work out, and he tried other things, and then he was teaching people how to teaching paratroopers at Fort Benning for a while. But anyway, he winds up with Al Tyre in the early 60s, and that's when Al told me that he's friends with John Singlob, and I'm like, man, that's impressive, because Singlob's a guy that he's kind of the forefather of Special Forces, because he was in something called the OSS in World War II, and Singlob was always looking for a way to get to the enemy. And he was in the early 60s when they were in Germany. Singlob wanted them to, he was always hanging out the parachute club with Ted Braden because, they would talk about World War II together because they were both in World War II. And Singlob was always wanting to see how you could get someone to jump out of an airplane but fully weighted down, like a free fall with all your equipment on. See, when they were jumping during World War II, in D-Day and stuff like that, it was static line. And, that was for short distances to the ground. But Singlob wanted to see if you could jump out of a plane, literally a free fall with your weapon, with all your gear on you, heavy weight, and not spin out. So Al Tyre volunteered to do that with Ted Braden being next to him. And they were doing that in the early 60s. And they would weight Al down with all the equipment, gun and everything. And then Ted would be there to make sure that Al wouldn't spin out. And that was a precursor to what they started doing in Vietnam and to Laos.
That's interesting, because just think, the average parachute jumper would not have the experience of having all that money wrapped around his chest.
Exactly.
Right.
These guys knew how to do it, because if you have that kind of weight around you, even 20 pounds makes a huge difference. I can't remember the exact weight of the money, but it was over 20 pounds, and that alone can spin you out. You could go into a spin, and it will kill you if you don't know what you're doing. And, that is definitely a dynamic that you're right. It's not talked about a lot. But Ted Braden was so good at it. I mean, he won all these competitions. He trained early to do that. And it comes up later that how we think his friendship with this General Singlob paid dividends for him, because he was a powerful guy. I mean, he later, after Ted Braden goes to Vietnam in 1965, and in 1966, his old friend, Mr. Singlob, becomes chief of SOG. So he's the head of that Special Forces unit for 1966. So that really helps Ted Braden, because that's his friend running the whole show, right?
Yeah.
And over there, Braden does crazy stuff. I mean, I talked to his he was called a 1-0 of Team Arizona. That means you're a team leader. They were designated by numbers. And he was a team lead 1-0. And your assistant team leader was called the 1-1, and that was a guy named Jim Hetrick that was with Ted Braden. And he told me everything they did over there, and it was some hair-raising stuff, and Jim could not believe that Ted Braden never got him killed by the risk he would take, while in Vietnam and in combat.
Now, was there more CIA involvement than you've described so far?
Absolutely.
Okay.
There's plenty of CIA involvement when you have Ted. Now, one of the first times that the CIA stuff comes up is a story from his first cousin that I know. And this is before he goes off to Vietnam in 1965, and he's at the airport with his aunt he was very close to, and she's there too, his cousin, and he remembers her father being there, and the aunt and her and Ted Braden. He was in his full uniform. They were in the officers club, and they went to go get drinks, and he was talking to his aunt, and they got in a big argument about Ted's passport because it was red, and his aunt said, "Why is your passport red and mine's blue?" And apparently it turned into this huge argument because he couldn't tell her why, but it turned out to be he had a secret passport. He had a CIA passport. And she told me at that time we knew he was involved with the CIA. He was on their radar, and they knew his special skill set. So she said, we as a family firmly believed after that incident with her that he was involved with the CIA. Now, when he's in Vietnam, Jim Hedrick will tell you when he used to, Ted Braden used to just disappear from base camp and go to Saigon. And every time he came back, he'd be in a special plane, and the plane would wag its wing, meaning come pick him up. And he had been hanging out with the CIA guys down in Saigon doing extra duty, extra missions that he couldn't disclose. He's already in the Black Ops unit to do things like assassinations. Well, guess who ordered the assassinations over there a lot? It was Singlob. It's true. If they had to assassinate somebody, whether it be a North Vietnamese major, whoever, maybe somebody that's seen as a good guy they had to take out, Singlob was given those orders and knew what Braden could do. So heavy ties there, doing things. And according to Jim, he said not only did Ted Braden know all the dirty stuff going on in Laos that they were doing, they would literally help out the local heroin dealers through Laos, if they would give them support in what they were trying to do. It didn't matter, whatever they had to do, they gave it to him. And Ted Braden was involved in a lot of that. And he also told me that Braden knew what the CIA was doing internationally, not just in Laos and stuff in Vietnam, but internationally knew what they were doing. And he had some kind of special get out of jail free card because they were afraid he would talk. And why they just didn't kill him is a good question. I don't know why. I think he was smart enough to threaten them that if anything ever happens to me, I got 5 guys back in the States. They're going to throw some packages in the mail. And the first time this comes up, this special protection he had, is Braden kills a guy in Vietnam. He kills a Vietnamese soldier, but it was a friendly soldier, the Republic of Vietnam, the RVN, Army soldier, which for some reason Braden hated. Even though they were on the side of the Americans, he hated these guys for some reason. He got in some kind of spat with the guy, winds up killing him. And, the guys in his unit, of course, came back to camp and said, hey, Ted killed this guy, and he really didn't need to be killed. They were just fighting, and he just killed him. And the officer above him, I think it was a colonel, literally threw the allegation in the trash can and just said, this never happened. And they were, they didn't want that getting out either. This guy killed a friendly force over here. And he literally just shelved it, just threw it in the trash. Didn't happen. So that's the first indicator we have Ted's getting special treatment.
Well, let me ask you this, because it seems like he was enjoying himself and was good at what he was doing. You mentioned he deserted. Yes,
he deserts. And according to him, it's all about money. He didn't make enough money. He was a sergeant first class. He said he liked the first class thing, but it wasn't paying enough. And we only know about this because Ted was in an article in Ramparts magazine, the September 1967 issue of Ramparts magazine. And the foreword is written by a guy named Donald Duncan, who is an ex-Vietnam Special Forces soldier that knew Braden from Vietnam. And Donald Duncan became really disillusioned with the Vietnam War, and he came back to the States. And, he turned down a promotion. I think to a colonel, something very high, and Duncan turned it down because he said, we shouldn't be in this fight. This is wrong. And Duncan came back to the States. He became like one of the top critics of the Vietnam War, and he's writing for Ramparts, and he winds up interviewing Braden about his time as a mercenary soldier. So it's really interesting. So at the end of 1966, Braden just decides to leave Vietnam. He doesn't tell anybody. He just decides to leave because he wants to go make more money fighting as a mercenary in the Congo. So he gets on a train, winds up getting on a flight somehow. He makes it back to the United States. He's in the United States for about 2 months, and